Good.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody to With Thunder's Applause, a podcast where two friends get together to discuss the events and ideas that will shape our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co-host, Zach. What's up?
Nothing much, just loading the background.
Do you want to take a second to load a real background, or do you like that one?
I can do it on the fly.
Because usually you do like a galaxy map, or
I do. I don't have to. I should have.
No, I like the sunset. It's very serene. It makes me feel like drinking a cocktail, and it makes me feel warmer than it is. Because the warm colors, I'm like, ooh, that feels toasty.
Ooh. All right. It'll stay warm.
Joke's on you. It's a sunset in like fucking Finland or some shit in the middle of winter.
Here you go. We'll get that'll keep you warm.
Oh, that's perfect. All right.
Fires during flooding.
Which kind of makes sense, right? Because disasters compound, right? Like that. So someone, gas line might have broke or something, right? Cool. So today's a Monday show.
It's
the Thunder's Applause podcast. Today we're talking about the FCC. This is your baby.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to claim it, but I was just
no one wants to claim the ugly baby.
Yeah, well, I was just
just leave it at the firehouse, man.
I was looking for stuff that wasn't Palestine.
It was still legal.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off.
No, I was just looking for stuff that wasn't Palestine again, because I mean that's ongoing, obviously, and all kinds of new atrocities every day, and people openly basically declaring war crimes and genocides, and no one's thinking that's a bad thing, apparently.
Yeah, these hospitals has been the newer news, right?
Yeah,
that the last two hospitals were not only being bombed, but like, they were out of fuel for their generators and shit. And since Israel controls their electricity, they had turned it off, weeks and weeks ago. So they were on generators. They ran out of their fuel reserves. And it just goes to show that, like, and I have heard this come up on a couple prepping channels, that what's happening in Gaza just shows, like, it really doesn't matter how much you prepare. All you're really doing is, like, buying time for shit to, like, settle itself out. Like, there's no way to actually prepare for something like that. Because even a hospital that's like, we need fuel reserves for our generators. Well, yeah, they have fuel reserves, but like, you have to be able to store those and keep them viable, which for like, if it's like diesel fuel or other refined petroleum product, they have to like add stabilizers. And even then they have a fucking shelf life.
Right.
So you have to constantly be buying them in to keep them topped off. And at some point you're like, well, you have to have a place to store it. All that storage infrastructure is an added expense. And then, you have, on top of that, then you have like security concerns, right? Because now people are like, well, there's a whole shit ton of diesel down at the hospital, right? And then people are,
we can go steal it.
Or whatever else, right? Like, it's just fucking, there's no way to prepare for something like that. All you can do is kind of soften the blow and try and ride it out as long as you can. And in Gaza, like, NPR did a thing, and of course, like, I don't know, Amy Goodman's fucking hardcore or whatever, but like, she's like, oh yeah, and then they're also like targeting medical personnel. Like, there's a doctor who was intentionally targeted and bombed in his house, killing him and all of his family. And they're like, so they're killing like surgeons and hospital administrators and shit because they want the health system to fail, because it's a fucking genocide.
I mean, I will say
the best thing they could have is disease and no fucking medical infrastructure. Go ahead.
I was going to say, that this is all very mainstreamed when John Oliver's talking about it on his show.
Did he yesterday?
Yeah.
Interesting. We will watch that because the writer's strike just fucking ended, and they come back, and he's like, in the very first episode back after the writer's strike, he's like, yeah, this is going on and it's fucking awful, but we don't want to talk about it right now.
Yeah.
And then he did like 3 or 4 episodes. I'm glad they finally were able to like put something together.
The wife said that she was disappointed because she didn't feel like she really learned anything new. And normally when she watches him, she learns something new. So like kind of disappointed, or she's just overinformed as compared to the average viewer of that show.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like, people are pretty heightened around this because, like, it's obvious end game of a genocide against Palestinians in Israel, and then also like escalating that to a regional war to help fucking the U.S. secure oil resources.
Yeah,
and we're gonna spend all of our country is gonna continue to be fucking looted here at home to support securing that region for the oil resources. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and we talk a lot about fucking energy descent. It's like a central theme of our show. That when complex societies collapse due to their own complexity and the fact that they like are dependent on a handful of like key resources, right? In our case, primarily oil, right? Because everything moves by oil. But other fossil fuels as well for energy, electricity, and heating, and all that other shit. And so, like, yeah, our country's going to be looted to try and secure those resources. And I want to see the anti-war movement like starting to recognize that like almost everything we do is to secure fucking resources. Like,
yeah.
And I want them to start voluntarily like stop like all this bullshit. Oh, let's travel to DC on planes for a fucking anti-war march. And I'm like you're fucking fueling it. Like you're making it, you're living a lifestyle that makes empire necessary. If you want to be truly anti-imperial, like tax war tax resistors. My friend Ron's a war tax resistor, which basically means like he will only ever work like under the table gig work. He rarely takes on jobs that actually like pay taxes. And he's and he's a principled war tax resistor, and there's other people in that movement. But I want to see more people who are saying I'm against war, like voluntarily, like reducing their lifestyle to one that's sustainable by what they can procure within a 10 or 15 mile radius of their house.
Yeah.
And then when they can do that, then we don't need empire.
Yeah, just basically, commit to the living small idea because you don't really need all the crap. I mean,
yeah,
most of the stuff that we see in a store, who's buying it? I gotta know. I think it's interesting that you mentioned, like how it's basically like war and energy going hand in hand, and pretty much always having done so.
Yeah.
I was watching a show on the Apple TV called For All Mankind, and it basically is an alternate take on if the Russians got to the moon first.
Oh.
And then it just kind of like butterfly effects from there, and it starts off in the 60s and goes by the decade. And they got to the point where they did what we haven't done, and that's undiscovered fusion. And I was like, I just kind of paused the show and I thought about it for a second. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much game over. Like, there's very little to fight over when you can turn,
abundant
hydrogen and helium into basically like massive, fuel. I was like, not only is there very little to fight over, but anyone who wants to make a nuclear bomb is now going to be very easily detectable because you just put a bunch of satellites in space that are looking for the radiation that sort of reactor emits. Like, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are like, no, that's clearly a fission reactor. We're getting all these particles that we only get from fission. What are you doing over there? And you need fission bombs to make fusion bombs. So the H bomb is gone. And so basically, like, I just dwelled on that for a minute, and I'm like, wow, in this alternate timeline, if they can get past like, the next few decades, they got it made. There's just so little to fight over after that.
Yeah, isn't that kind of the premise? I never watched it, and I heard that most people hated the fucking J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and of course he fucked up Star Wars too, so like it just makes sense. But like, I think it was the First Contact. No. What was the first remake with the J.J. Abrams?
I don't know, man.
Okay,
I've seen them all like once.
I've never seen it, but I remember seeing part of it where they're like running somewhere and they actually wind up running through a power plant, and it's just like a bunch of like tiny fusion reactors.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting because they're kind of like establishing that when we have like practically free, very low energy, very low risk, energy, that, you know, we don't have to fucking fight each other over it, right?
Yeah.
It also helps that we're like, oh my god, there's fucking spacefaring aliens and they want us to join them.
Yeah.
And we're like,
and there's other ones that want to eat our spleens.
Who's that? The Klingons?
Oh, like Klingons and shit like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many enemy races were there? Because I thought the Klingons were friends.
At times it varies. It depends on what timeline it is, which I don't even know where all the new shows fit in, man. Oh, but you know what they do have in Star Trek? Subspace communication. Very similar to broadband.
Very similar to broadband. Go ahead and tell us about it.
All right. So anyway, I wanted to get away from it. And I was wondering to myself, as I think we talked about on the show, what might something like this be covering? And wife helped me to find something, and that is the FCC opposing a plan by Biden that would take sweeping control of ye olde internet.
Specifically, I must add,
yes,
a commissioner.
Yes, a commissioner.
Republican appointed commissioner.
Yes.
Is being very vocal about what he feels is a power grab.
Yes. And I've got like a video where he says some other stuff, and like it's not all terrible. And so it's not like, he's coming out of nowhere, and he doesn't have at least 100%, our profit in mind, or at least he didn't a few years ago. This statement here makes me think he may have changed his tune for some reason. I can't think why. But
so did you do research on who he was?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I only looked up who he was and like where he came from. He came from a law firm called Wiley Rain.
Yeah, he's a lawyer. Yeah.
Yeah, and they are a global law firm that mostly deals in essentially lobbying, like helping foreign companies and foreign investors navigate the various rules of the bureaucracy. And so for the FCC, there's some rules in place like to basically prevent foreign governments or either through shell companies or whatever, but basically prevent foreign entities from having absolute control over what we consider to be critical infrastructure. And so he worked for a law firm that helped facilitate those kinds of purchases moving through the bureaucracy and the regulatory process, because it's not illegal to do it, but we have like a bunch of safeguards and paperwork to file on everything, and they help facilitate that.
Right.
Not just in telecoms, but in a bunch. In fact, they're like one of the largest law firms, I think, in DC. There's like 250 fucking lawyers that work for that firm. It's crazy. Yeah. At any rate, so I did look at him. He's a Trump appointee. It said that Biden also was okay with him, but I thought appointees are 5 years for the FCC. And so he's not really up. That seat's not really up for being refilled. So I'm not quite sure what that meant when I read it. It's like, and he was a Trump appointee, but Biden also approved of him or something.
Oh, I mean, he might have known him from somewhere else and just been like, hey, he's an all right guy. That could have been the end of it.
We won't try to remove him before his term is over because okay, fair enough. All right.
He starts off and he says something that I don't think is controversial, and that's that the Democrats have been in charge of the FCC and administrative agencies in DC for approaching 12 out of the last 16 years. They've had the opportunity over that stretch of time to put in place nearly any federal telecom policy of their choosing. I don't think that's false. I think that's completely true. I think there's a lot of things that people look to the Democrats to do, and they give lip service saying they're going to do it, and then they don't do it. But then who are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? Vote for a Republican? So we get the same old people all the time. And I don't think that's a controversial statement either.
Can you define that digital divide it talks about? Because he's saying that federal government's spent hundreds of billions of dollars on that's just like expanding broadband access, you mean?
Right. It's basically like how we have like income inequality, basically digital inequality. Yeah. And he actually makes a pretty good statement in one of the videos that we're going to watch that I completely agree with. It's about
so that's like the program where I get subsidized internet because I'm poor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. He then goes on to say that the cost of building internet infrastructure in this country have skyrocketed thanks to the Biden administration's inflationary policies. I don't think that's true. I think it's skyrocketed just because of the fact that we have, we've got Comcast out here, and you can get like 800 megabit per second for like $80. It's not great, but it's not bad. And the next nearest competitor can't even get above like 25 megabits a second in my area. And they had recently spent a bunch of like time and money installing fiber optics, tearing up the roads, blocking traffic, stuff like that. But they only put in just enough to get like basic service. And so they're competing. It's basically David and Goliath saying that, they're competing, but really like Goliath just kind of lets David exist. He's truly no threat.
Yeah, the price of holy shit, I guess so. I looked up the price of on macrotrends.net, looked up the price of 45-year price of copper.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of it is from starting in 2000, like the copper price just skyrocketed, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And because it went from 60, it looks like around like 60 to 80 cents across the late 90s, early 2000s, and then in about 2003, 2004, it jumped up to $4 a unit. And more recently, it's just like astronomically. I don't know how accurate that is. It says $57 for what is it per pound? Yeah, it says as of November 14th, 2023, the price is $58.70 a pound. Holy shit! Prepare to have fucking people breaking into fucking construction sites again. Like
on Veterans Day, we were going to get some food, and we were driving by. There's a bunch of people in like along the sidewalk just stripping wire, like waiting to go into a Denny's.
Wow, that's incredible. So that's a price jump of. So that's the inflationary prices, perhaps. No, because September 4th, 2023. So a month ago, it was $4 a fucking pound. So either this is incorrect and the computer gets it wrong, or because of the shit in the Middle East.
You're talking about copper, right?
Yes. Why?
I was looking up prices like this, and I find that sometimes they refer to per pound and sometimes they refer to per ton.
Oh, it says per pound at the top of the chart.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like it could be stuff. It's not just inflation though, right? Like, and it wasn't just Biden's inflationary policies. The price of copper has been about $4 a pound for the last fucking 20 years.
Okay.
Until like basically right now, if that's accurate, that could be a mistake. Kind of like when if you pay attention to like automated weather reporting stations for like the agricultural service and stuff, like sometimes when there's like data that's so far outside of what you would expect, they just say count it as an error and say it's incorrect.
Yeah.
Even if it is correct, they just fucking anything that's outside of the bell curve, they scrub and they make it a blank value, or usually it's like a letter that indicates a bad value.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so carry on. So it's not just Biden's inflationary, and that's why I actually
it's not just
who
that.
He was, because it's like that's this is his statement.
It's a very specific thing to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also that Commissioner Carr's statement about this issue at the FCC. So this is from his perspective. Someone is like, oh, Democrats have been in charge and they don't like their rules, and then it's like, oh, and it's like impossible to do this, expand broadband access because of Biden's inflationary policies.
Right.
People don't understand, man. I saw a poll just the other day. I was talking to Brooke about it. That like people are like, I was doing so much better economically under Trump, and therefore maybe we should let Trump try again. And I'm like, bro, like the economy doesn't like people just think that like a president gets elected and then the economy just changes. Like when there's like things that are done like the Iraq war and shit, right? All the money printing of quantitative easing from 2008 until basically like
yesterday.
What? Yeah, or a year or two ago.
Yeah.
That's what's caused the inflation.
Yeah.
Not because Biden got elected.
And there's knock-on effects for decades. Like nothing that a president does really has an immediate effect unless it's like saying that, like gay people can marry or something like that and doing it by government edict. The economy does not turn on a dime.
No, it does not, especially under our system where it's not command. Under a market system, like the fucking any system reacts slowly, even a command system.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to be instantaneous because systems have delays and lags. All systems do. Sometimes we don't recognize those. When you flip a light switch on, you don't notice that it actually takes a second. But if you fucking timed it, there is a lag. There is a delay.
Yeah.
It's just not significant to us,
right?
As the subject, right? Observing it. But yeah. So I think anybody that says that shit is deeply out of touch with how the economy actually fucking works.
Right.
And like these are the people that fucking vote.
Like
and this
really
is why we're so fucked.
Well, really, it's something that Obama did probably 5 to 8 years ago that changed it for them. Like he made some minor tweak or something like that, or even something totally unrelated. The price of aluminum dropped 13, fractions of a penny. And that just had all kinds of knock-on effects. Like,
yeah, or as we discussed on the show before, like when Trump wanted to like tariff certain things from China, like it totally disrupted shipping because now Chinese companies shipping stuff are like, well, we're not shipping these things anymore, so we have to like change all of our routes.
Yeah,
and that means that some ports aren't getting visited by our vessels, and so people aren't getting the things that they're used to getting. And that was because Trump wanted to fucking tariff like soybeans or some shit.
Yeah,
or I forget what it was, but like anyway, go ahead.
It was even steel. You saw increases in prices in computer cases that were made out of steel. Like immediate jumps, $25. Whether that was based on any actual change in price, or whether that was just based upon the knee-jerk reaction that is the rich people feeling index, I couldn't tell you. But yeah, like $25 changes within like a week.
And there's a lot of reasons to for the price of copper to spike. The federal government is gearing up for like a long-term and very bloody hot war with fucking Iran and possibly Russia and China. So the United States government is buying up like fucking tons of, and they're building weapons and ships and planes, and they're so there's the war economy, right? And then also like a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act stuff from a couple years ago, that there's a bunch of throwing money at like renewables and shit. So now you also have like wind turbine manufacturers that need copper and like all sorts of components for all sorts of electric vehicles and all that shit.
Yeah.
And I guess we're talking fiber optics more with broadband.
Broadband can be done with regular cables. I mean, what we have, the coaxial cables, that is at least for the last mile portion of it, pretty much copper. Branded or braided copper. It might be in between big distribution centers, fiber optic, but for most of us, whatever comes out of the wall is copper.
Plus all the signal regulation and everything else involved. All that circuitry has gold and copper and other like nickel and other minerals
and everything.
Yeah,
you name it, it's got it. Cobalt.
Yeah.
He concludes.
Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Carr concludes that the problem that the administration has apparently concluded is that the FCC has never gone full command and control when it comes to regulating the internet. So basically, he's saying that the bill that has been the change that has been put forth is basically just government control of everything. And reading a little bit more about it, it is pretty overreaching, and it's written like someone who doesn't fully understand what they're doing. So that's not great. But then it says, or he goes on and says, for the first time ever, those rules would give federal government a roving mandate to micromanage nearly every aspect of how the internet functions. from how internet service providers allocate capital and where they build to services that consumers can purchase, from the profits that ISPs can realize and how they market and advertise services to the discounts and promotions that consumers can receive. Talk about central planning. So yeah, his capitalism is showing, and he makes no effort to hide it. But I will say that much of what he points out here has been done in other sectors very successfully, like Pac Bell and all that stuff. They got really regulated and basically told like you have to provide phone lines for everyone. They have to be of a certain quality, etc., etc. And we have absolutely said, like you cannot make above a certain amount of profit for things like the electrical industries.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So like we have and will continue to do this sort of thing. So I just think it's definitely like pandering to his base, like, oh, look at all this overregulation that's occurring. And it's like, this is basically like the mail system and the phone system combined. And like they're in both instances, well, I guess less so in the phone, but in mail, of course, you have the government option, and then you have a private industry that offers options as well.
Right.
And so to me, it makes sense that you would also have the same for the internet and for phones. But we shall see if it goes through, because they vote on Wednesday. Yes, today is Monday. They vote on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And we shall see how they choose to vote. Cargo's
excuse me.
Car goes into it a bit, and he just kind of goes on. He says, network reliability, network upgrades, network maintenance are all going to be managed. And I mean, that's what we do with nuclear power plants. We say like, hey, you need to have maintenance every so often. We're going to send inspectors out, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is just regulation of something that has been relatively unregulated for too long.
Right. For way too long, for how central it is to the functioning of our society.
Yeah.
Right. Like
we couldn't do this. That's the thing, is we couldn't do this. We couldn't as effectively complain about our government if we don't have a free and open internet on which to do it.
Yeah, that's true. But then also at the same time, like I don't know, like maybe you'll show us, but like as of right now, I think like network like standards of excuse me, I just took a sip of beer and it gave me the hiccups. Network reliability. This is basically being like, if people pay for a service, there is a minimum threshold you have to provide.
Yeah,
it cannot be a monopoly. ISPs are a monopoly. You get maybe two choices.
Yeah, duopoly at best, and it cannot be like the ice cream machine at McDonald's. It needs to work most of the time.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say it has to work all of the time, because I was at a Girl Scout meeting tonight. There was a 911 dispatcher came to talk to the kids.
Yeah.
911 doesn't work without the fucking internet.
Yeah, and if the phone goes
connected to maps and everything else, and there's all sorts of other telecom lines, they have to be connected.
Yeah.
So, I think that things about like setting speed. Yeah, I think that you should.
I mean, set floors for everything, because we all need it.
Yeah, and I think like data caps, throttling, pricing. I think pricing
pricing is controlled in a lot of industries.
It really is. Like you said, electricity.
Yeah. That's just the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, for real.
He says that the plan is motivated by an ideology of government control that is not compatible with the fundamental precepts of free market capitalism. And there we go again, the government confusing economics and politics, worrying that they're not sticking to capitalism when capitalism is not the foundation of the country. It's democracy, yo.
It's religion.
That's what they'd like us to think.
And property ownership. So I guess capitalism in some ways. Yeah. Excuse me.
Now, here's one that I am going to highlight again. Then I'm going to play a video right immediately afterwards, because I want him to basically eat his own words. So he's talking about the whole thing, and he says that this means that ISPs could very well be compelled to build our internet infrastructure without any compensation.
Yeah, and
well, all right. Bill Carr 2 years ago. What do you have to say about that?
How much of this tax should consumers bear versus big tech companies? Do you think big tech companies should pay the lion's share of this?
Yeah, of course. I think right now it's 100% borne by consumers and 0%, as far as I can tell, paid into by big tech. And I think that we should flip that around, and the lion's share should be paid for by the businesses that benefit. If there's a small portion that continues under the old system, I'm not opposed to that, but we need to make this fundamental shift going forward. The reality is this is consistent with past precedent. Historically, communications networks in this country were paid for in the main by the businesses that benefited. Now, it used to be 1-800 numbers, fax lines, long distances. It was those businesses that benefited from the network. They paid the majority, that drove down the cost for consumers. But as big tech has arisen, we failed to update our approach so that these new businesses that are benefiting so much from these high-speed networks are paying a fair share towards those networks.
Thank you, Bill Carr, from 2 years ago. I appreciate that.
No, and it's a fucking fantastic point, right? It's something I think I've said about roads, right?
Mm-hmm.
All these roads, like, we have to tax ourselves to pay for the road, but do you know who doesn't pay for the road? Fucking UPS, FedEx,
right?
Like these
Amazon,
all these big trucks that are pounding the road to deliver to the box stores.
Oh yeah,
they don't live here, and so they don't pay property taxes, and they're not paying sales taxes. Excuse me. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, in additional, like, you absolutely know that it's the truck trucks doing most of the damage, because if you're in any state where trucks have to mostly stick to the right-hand lane, that's the most fucked up lane.
It's really the most fucked up lane. And so I've said that about roads, right? Like, why are all of these businesses whose entire fucking business model relies on that infrastructure not paying? And now they do, right? The truck has a license fee and it pays, but it's not proportional to the damage they do, because we all, as driving passenger cars, are paying into roads. And that seems fair to me, right?
Yeah.
But again, our cars aren't doing the same damage as a fucking semi truck, right?
And we are paying in some way for those trucks to drive, but we can't afford it all by ourselves. We need that company to also pay some of it.
Right. And I think it's completely reasonable to be like, hey, Google, like, you're literally, like, you don't exist without the internet. Like, maybe you should put some of your hundreds of billions of dollars into better infrastructure, and not just tethered balloons, right? Where they're trying to own the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
He goes down here and he says, the FCC arrogates to itself the power to review and determine the lawfulness of promotional pricing and discounts. And then he says it even puts the use of credit checks squarely in the crosshairs. My immediate reaction to this was, why the fuck are credit checks involved in getting a service when the service can be canceled at any moment? You don't pay your bill, they turn off the service. You don't need to involve my credit in that. You give me a chance, and if I fuck it up, you just take it away. And then maybe I can't use your company for like a year or something like that, because my name's got a black mark.
Or you got to pay up your bill.
Or you got to pay up your bill before you can get, back into it. Like, you don't need to check my credit for that. You already have my home address. Like, you're good. It's so ridiculous that that's something that anyone is concerned about.
Yeah, that makes no fucking sense.
Yeah. He goes on, talks
or
about,
if anything, what it does is it makes poor people, it creates a bigger barrier for poor people.
Right. When we need to be knocking that barrier down so that they can, like, actually use the internet to better their lives.
Right. Like jobs or whatever. Yep. Well, I don't mean that in terms of bettering their lives, but, like, think about it. Like, most jobs, you have to apply online.
That's true. Yeah.
So if you have, you're too poor and your credit check failed, so we're not giving you the internet.
On 2 separate occasions I can think of, I watched someone come in, ask about applying, and got told, you have to apply on the internet. And then they just kind of grumbled and walked away. I have seen places where you could apply on the internet at the store, like they had little kiosks for it. But yeah, you do need the internet in order to apply for anything. Like, you can't just walk in anymore unless it's a mom and pop shop, and Amazon's made sure those are gone. So
And yeah, that my neighbor's best friend, he's an older guy, and he's been a small engine mechanic most of his life, excuse me. And he's had to apply, and he had to basically he was coming over there to use their internet, and computer, because he didn't have internet or computer.
It's that or the library.
Yep.
Section 6056 then directs the FCC to adopt rules that facilitate equal access to broadband, again, to the extent technically and economically feasible. He has some ideas about what we can do about areas that are harder to get to in a video that we will watch. But I thought that this word right here just fills me with dread, because you know what else we have fair and equal access to is healthcare.
Healthcare, right?
We got a lot of fucking access to healthcare. Can't afford the shit, but we got access to it.
Yep.
So that word immediately set off all the alarms that I have in my brain that are associated with
and that's actually
political speak.
Yeah, that's come up a lot too in the context of BLM and all this other stuff. Is that the way that they use these words? Everybody's got access to a Mercedes Benz. Yeah. Few have the means to get one.
Yeah, I mean, I got the means, but I'll get arrested eventually.
All right.
I just thought I'd pull up a little bit on Wikipedia for Brendan Carr, since I pay them some money every month. It's an invaluable fucking resource to me. Let's see. He's had some interesting positions on some other things. One of the ones that I thought was kind of funny was he is a critic of TikTok and accused of the platform of harming users and undermining national security, and has referred to TikTok as digital fentanyl. Fucking love that.
Mm-hmm.
He has said that parents whose children use the application should be concerned with their privacy. True, 100%. You don't know if the camera is being turned on, when you don't know about it. There are ways to make it so the little light doesn't turn on, and I wouldn't put it past a company to do that.
I had a friend tell me, he's like, "You use TikTok? You realize it's just China spying on you?" I was like, "Dude, do you realize that my own government's already spying on me?"
Yeah. Hey, at least if China's spying on you, maybe you can get a good deal on something that you need.
And if China is spying on me, I don't fear their reach. I don't think they're going to kick my fucking door in and assassinate me.
Yeah.
Or disappear me. I am concerned that my own government would do such a thing.
Yeah. And he goes on to say that the FCC has no authority to regulate online content and platforms like TikTok, and has limited power to restrict or ban speech. And I think that is 100% something that they shouldn't have. The internet finally gave us access to everything, and people hate it. Anyone who's trying to make any money hates it. It's man, if people want to go off in their corner and be Nazis, I'd rather they were off in their corner online being Nazis. Maybe they can play Second Life or something. I don't know. Keep them out of the real world.
Yeah,
he kind of was trying to pressure everybody to get rid of it. And I think what it really boils down to is that American politicians just can't stand the idea that they can't mine all that sweet data for themselves.
Well, remember when the Trump administration threatened to get rid of TikTok? It wasn't about actually getting rid of TikTok. They wanted American oligarchs to have to
own a version
of 50% stake in TikTok.
Yeah.
And so they basically said, American users won't be able to use it unless you let some of our fucking hedge funds buy shares.
Yeah.
In the company.
I don't believe that ever came to a pass.
I think it did.
Oh.
But this is not a show about TikTok.
This is not a show about TikTok. But this is a show, however, about telecoms.
It is.
Here we go. Bam. 30 seconds.
Last quick question, Commissioner. This $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill includes $100 billion to invest in digital infrastructure. 30 seconds. How do you want that money to be spent?
Well, first and foremost, it has to be unserved areas. There's some proposals out there right now that would spend billions of dollars upgrading areas that already have high-speed service to make sure they have future-proof networks, so to speak. I think that's a mistake.
Okay.
We need to very narrowly identify the truly unserved that have 0 megabits, and let's get them up to speed right now.
He seems completely reasonable, dude.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He's right about that, because he's saying basically we have areas that have no megabits per second. Like maybe if they're lucky, they have kilobits a second. And like,
yeah, I mean,
that's an instance.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of instances where like, the hand-me-down economy works. Like if I have a graphics card in my computer and I buy a new one, I can give the old one to a friend who has a worse one. And now he's got one when he didn't have one before, or he gets an upgrade or whatever. But like, you can't just upgrade your internet and pass it on to a poorer area. Pass the old one onto a poorer area that doesn't have it. Like, and he, I don't think he pointed it out there, but we actually end up spending the bulk of our money just making areas that already have it slightly better.
Yeah.
We do not spend a lot on giving other people access.
Yeah, and I think that the shift to like the internet-based services economy really has driven people into cities and out of like small towns. And I think ultimately one of the best things that could come out of this is like, go to the fucking Rust Belt, dude, and go to coal country and install fucking fiber optics, and then follow up with skills training and micro grant programs or whatever, so that folks up there can buy the equipment they need to do crafts and then sell them on online marketplaces.
Yeah. Or even do what they're always talking about and quote, learn to code. But like they never really point out that like someone in the Rust Belt can't really work for a company like Google or something like that if they don't have fast enough internet to like join a voice or a video chat meeting. Like
and moreover, like you're not going to tell someone who's in their mid 40s that they're going to fucking learn to code and start.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, that wasn't the point. It was the idea of like, hey, go get a job that requires the internet. By the way, the internet sucks in your town.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I grew up, my parents still do not have fiber optic.
Yeah.
They have DSL.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's what's in their area. And I'm sure if they had the funds, they might get Starlink. Your dad seems like he'd be all about that. Like it's in space.
Maybe. I mean, they might actually have Starlink at this point. But they had DSL for a long time. I haven't talked to them in a while. Yeah. They might have upgraded that, because you're right. My pops probably would want better.
He'd love that shit.
It would probably be required, right?
Yeah.
But at any rate, the community I grew up in, most people don't have internet access, and if they do, it's they put some cell towers where in my town, so now people can actually get like basically high-speed internet on their phones, and that's how they use the internet. And guess what? Most places in the world, that's how they interact with the internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the cell phone is cheap, and I mean relatively cheap, and universal.
I mean, to cite at least just like one, lone incident, I bought a phone and then like a year later they were on sale at the same store for $20 a piece. So yeah, like cell phones can get pretty damn cheap, if you're willing to have something that's not great. And that was interesting, because that was actually part of like the appeal of supposedly, the Raspberry Pi. I was like, oh yeah, with like a really cheap phone and this really cheap microcomputer, like you can do all kinds of stuff. And that was an instance where they were targeting younger people and saying like, you can't learn to code from wherever you are and do all this stuff because you have access to the internet through your phone to distribute it, and a device that can compile a bunch of stuff relatively quickly.
Explain this thing about coding to me real quick. Like the
fascination with it.
Well, because like again, Girl Scouts, right?
Yeah.
They've transitioned at some point. I don't think that long ago, transitioned to like very STEM focused, and now there's like more fucking like coding and cookies are like 80% of what Girl Scouts do.
Yeah.
They have more coding, different kinds of coding badges and coding adjacent badges than they do like outdoor rec and nature and shit like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I guess secondhand, coding for the chicken and pig setup. There's that. And I mean that's just one example that we managed to encounter. There's a whole bunch more, and like if you think about like any game on your phone, like someone made those. Yeah, there are like companies that just pump them out. But then there are like the labors of love where like, oh yeah, I spent like 3 years of my off time programming this, and I hope to get like a few $1,000s out of it. And maybe that's all they get, but it's something. And like, you can generate that passive revenue if you can get your games popular enough.
Yeah, and
And
onto
so, I
a
mean,
platform where they'll continue to be downloaded for
yeah,
kind of like an actor with residuals or whatever.
yeah, exactly. And I mean,
Yeah.
it might not be much, and it might not be anything, and that's just one example of what you can use coding for.
So,
But I mean,
but
billions of dollars are made off that.
But at some point,
Hmm.
we don't need to code anything else,
True.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're
I
like,
mean,
everybody needs to code. Like, well, if everybody coded, like,
yeah.
how would they sell code?
No, and that's the thing, is we're doing exactly what we did with college. We're over prescribing. Exactly what we did with fucking Oxycontin. We're over prescribing. We don't seem
fentanyl.
Yeah. Digital fentanyl. Yeah, we don't seem to know like when too much is too much. I think that's a good call. Like, when you start to hear everyone talking about something as like the next big thing, and there's so much money to be made, you can almost guarantee there's not going to be much money to be made like within a decade, because it'll be tapped.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man. I just don't understand I never understood it. I mean, teaching kids about coding, I think, is cool.
We don't have any industry, and we don't have any like public works or anything like that. So actually learning about nature in the mind of someone who is not ready for a collapse of civilization just doesn't make economic sense. It makes more sense to try anything, and at least coding is relatively free to learn. Like, you can do it 100% free.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, yeah, they've taken a bunch of coding, including like graphic design by coding, which I didn't even realize was a thing, but like, apparently the coding is how you make like GIFs and like other or GIFs or whatever.
Yes, and you can do generative art as well.
The coding, yeah. I just, and it's funny because when I was like way younger, all we ever did was steal other people's fucking code.
Yeah. Script kiddies.
Yeah, but we were trying to make our own video game like walkthrough website.
Yeah,
that was back in the days of GeoCities hosting.
Oh yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
back in the day. GeoCities,
I coded a couple of games early on, and in high school, relatively addicting, but didn't follow through.
Classic.
Never made a website before. Never saw the need. I was like, I don't know what I have to offer the world. I'm sorry.
Well, back then, like when you're making a website, a GeoCities website or whatever, like you're putting in all of the code, and now like years later, they develop just drag and drop. And so now building a website is like the fucking code is written for you.
There's basically a program that does the coding on your behalf. It's not elegant.
All you do is arrange it.
Yeah, it's not elegant. It's not minimalist. Like, a lot of times there's a whole bunch of redundancies that don't need to be there, and that can slow things down. But in this era of like heavy processing in the palm of your hands, that doesn't really matter as much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a kind of elegant dance between like capacities, how many bits you're moving, efficiency, and like, I don't want to say technological progress, but the way that it has progressed.
I mean, it's really just calculations per cycle.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting, but at the same time, like, I don't know. Commissioner Carr seems to be pretty upset. I mean, should we call the FCC and be like, "Hey, you should vote no"? Because I'm honestly like, well, if they're spending a shit ton of money on infrastructure, the Congress does it. FCC doesn't get to choose that Congress said spend this money. What they're doing is trying to help facilitate that money getting spent in a way that furthers their fucking mission, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, I don't know, dude. Like, yeah, part of me is just like, I don't really think what's happening. I don't think the government is grabbing for that. Again, like, a lot of people, I have a handful of friends that are very kind of like chemtrails, fucking 5G, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they're constantly like, oh, one world government, like, and I was like, dude, do you realize like our national governments can't control the population.
Yeah.
Our local governments can't control the population. Do you know why they'll fucking show up with like 30 riot police when they're like a couple hundred people show up downtown for a protest? Because they have to be intimidating. Because if we got out of hand, they couldn't stop us.
Yeah. If we ever decided, well, we outnumber you like 30-1.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, even more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, and how many, I mean, live fire is the only way, right?
Yeah.
And then it's a massacre. And then they have a fucking PR nightmare. So especially if you're doing like nonviolent protest stuff, the cops fucking shooting you is probably beneficial to your cause.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, right? Like police overreacting is like one of the objectives of a lot of nonviolent protests.
Yeah.
I mean, you might say that, not to come back to Palestine, but you might say that Hamas anticipated
no,
Israel overreacting, and they saw that would advance their cause, and they felt like we have to break the stalemate. We can't just live in this fucking prison forever.
They have straight said that. So yes.
And now the world is like, oh my God, you're the fucking Nazis you always cry about.
Right. Back to the topic. Something you said a little earlier kind of sparked my memory, and that was like I oppose the idea of the government like actually in control of the internet, like the federal government in control of 100% of the internet. What I don't oppose is like local governments, doing municipal broadband and things like that. Like that's a good way to do it. It splits it up in smaller, levels, lets everyone try new things, and then also, you get good service, and that's where the government steps in and says like, oh, we have minimums. If you are unable to meet the minimums, here's some money to help you meet the minimums. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm 100% for you. I think the decentralization. I mean, I regularly advocate on this show for balkanization. I think that everything being decentralized a little bit would go a long way into helping us deal with the fact that complex societies collapse because they're too complex. And so like maybe becoming like simplifying voluntarily might be a strategy for dealing with all of these contradictions in the economy and in society.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily buy into the ability of the government. Like the government already has the ability that if they didn't want us to have internet, they shut it off.
Right.
When I was in Afghanistan, every time there was like a fucking attack on a convoy, or they hit an IED, or they attacked the gate and killed people trying to break onto base, the internet would just get shut off.
Yeah. Because they don't want you talking about it.
Because they didn't want you talking about it. They wanted the opportunity to notify next of kin.
Right.
Which is their policy and procedure. They just you just didn't have the internet for hours, and however long it took for them to notify.
Not only that, but you're not giving away the fact that you've been attacked and you might be vulnerable to just anybody.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. I'm sure there was probably some OPSEC reasons for it too. Yeah. My understanding was a lot of it was just like notifying next of kin.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember basic training. They're like, you're writing letters home and you might get to stand in a line for like a 3-minute phone conversation.
Yeah.
Right. With a calling card. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you actually, because they're like, this is what it's like, it's really fucking hard. And then you actually go downrange and you're like, oh, we got an MWR with fucking high-speed internet access and shit. Like, I'm talking to my kids every fucking day via video call.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the people out in the fucking fobs and shit didn't really get that. But like, when they came into the main base and did their, MWR stuff and did their, their break, they're taking the break from being out in a forward operating base, they had access to all that. So, and they wouldn't be writing letters from the fob because letters could get mailed. But like they'd be like, why would I mail a letter? I'll just fucking
email.
Wait until I get back to the fucking base and send an email. Yeah, exactly.
Even on a submarine, you can send emails every once in a while. So like,
I've never been at a forward operating base. I'm just assuming.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Some of the ones that I've heard about, because I talked to pilots and loadmasters and shit that would make drops at the fobs, and they're pretty bare bones.
Yeah,
they're pretty bare bones. So, because they're mostly they're just a patrol base, right? So they'll fly supplies in, and then they just have a fucking, a bunch of trucks or whatever, and some soldiers, and that's where they sleep and shit. And then they're otherwise running patrols.
Yeah.
You know, they have a small command staff or whatever for radio communication.
If it's anything like a submarine, you basically just write all your emails. It gets saved in a queue, and then, you know, like once a day
or whatever.
Yeah, like once a day they do an upload, and then you like once a day they do a download of all personal mail. I mean, like, it's not hard to do these days. Starlink, we've got the same satellites, you know. So yeah, I mean, like, we're in constant, like, even in the middle of war, you know. As long as you're not on the receiving side, you're in constant contact.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
would so seem. Yeah.
So kind of this Commissioner Carr being like, "Oh, the government is coming after your internet, right? Like they're grabbing at your internet."
Yeah, you're gonna take your internet guns.
Or the Robin Williams joke about total information technology. When you're sucking on the tip that got you by the motherboard.
I haven't heard that one. Nice.
Oh yeah. He's got a whole bit about
awesome.
Internet companies like just controlling you or whatever. Yeah. At any rate, yeah, I just don't foresee like the government being able. They already have the capacity to shut us off.
Yeah.
I don't think that any kind of regulation they're doing is going to harm it more than it already is being controlled by essentially a fucking monopoly.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about how communications work, it's basically like undersea cables are the primary method, and those get broken every once in a while. But other than that, like,
we're sabotaged.
Yeah. But I mean, those are very centralized locations that our government can go in and be like, boop, nope, like nothing gets past here. You know, like, you can have the internet all you want inside the country, but nothing goes past this cable. And then it's just a matter of like, you go into Starlink and be like, hey, if you want to do any business, you know, in this country, you got to play ball. It's like, it's not real hard for the government to turn off everything for you.
Right. And as it is right now, like, fucking, you download fucking an episode of fucking Walking Dead, and Compass is like, that's intellectual property. You stole it.
Yeah.
Don't do that again, or we'll take your internet from you. Cool. So, like, we're already being strong armed into like how we behave on the internet by the fucking Motion Picture Association or whatever, by Hollywood, right? Like,
yeah. MPA's got us by the balls.
It's fucking outrageous. You want to cue music?
Breaking my balls.
Do you want to do the outro? All right, man. Tell me. Do you think there's a call to action here or no? Yeah, you brought it up, and you're like, "There's an important vote on Wednesday."
I mean, it definitely couldn't hurt. You know, we've got a day and some change.
And you're advocating that people say, "Do not pass these new rules." You're more of a status quo than taking a gamble.
I don't think it's about the status quo. I just think maybe it's a little bit too overreaching. But I would say that you can absolutely read the thing for yourself, and see if you agree with it. It is, however, 216 pages long, so put on your reading glasses.
Yeah, and get to it, because it's going to take you a while to read it, and you have to do it before Wednesday.
Yeah, exactly.
Presumably like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern.
Probably
is when they probably meet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but dude, folks, do your research. Figure it out. Figure out what you want, and also maybe advocate locally. I know Ron Placone is a comedian around on the interwebs places, and he's been a long time advocate locally in his own government, bringing up municipal broadband and public ownership over our internet infrastructure, because I think it's really important. I don't like my internet infrastructure being controlled by for-profit corporations. I would much rather, and that's the thing, right? It's an issue of scale, right? Because what we're saying is like, maybe the federal government shouldn't have that much power over the internet, but like a local government that might be more responsive, I might trust more.
Yeah.
Because that local government is going to be limited by federal and state laws in other realms like censorship and stuff like that.
Right.
But if the federal government's doing it, then there's really no place to raise your grievance.
Right? Yeah. All you can do at that point is try to go to the Supreme Court.
Right. Which is generally going to rule in favor of the state.
Yeah, well, and capitalism.
And capital, right. Did you hear they just passed ethics rules? Let's plan on doing that. Oh shit. interesting. We should say.
Yes,
Thursday
I'm already.
may or may not be a shooting the poodoo. I'm going to be out of town. Probably what we do is going to be very minimalistic. I'm not sure. I'm most likely going to be doing it from my phone. So shitty audio and visual quality, right? Like as we've done before when I was traveling for work. So we will figure out exactly what we're going to do. We'll be back because there's lots to talk about. And there's lots to talk about because this is the end of Empire. And when Liberty dies, it dies with thunder's applause. Right at an hour. Beautiful. Show me the Grogu.
Beautiful baby Yoda.